Alright then Tenno, there's been a pretty hefty update to Warframe called the Warframe Revised update. It's update 27.2, and it's in fact heavy enough that I'm not going to be able to cover all of it in just one video. So I'm going to pare this down to the most staggering of changes in ordinary Warframe. This means I will be skipping over most of the railjack changes, as I'm one of those people who didn't much fancy grinding out millions of credits and staggering amounts of other resources just for a bigger ship. This also means I'm one of those people who are particularly happy to find out this update means railjack is now up to 90% cheaper. Anyone who built any part of the railjack prior to revised update will be refunded those extra resources on login, plus you'll get some early adopter bonuses such as rush repair drone or two. Suffice to say, they're adding quality of life and accessibility to the mode. This is good. So, let's start covering what else is significantly changing to warrant this somewhat cut down video of all the patch notes. There are changes to armor and health and the shield values for all enemies. Changes to the AI aimbots basically being nerfed out. Shield gating is now a thing for everyone. Arcanes are going through a massive change. The removal of self-damage, ninja reflexes are being added, excavators are getting a buff, NAF rewards are being, well, slightly less NAF. There's the new ultimate pizza boxes, and sentinels are getting more sensible with their mods. There's status changes, and I mean a load of status changes, and a whole bunch of other smaller aspects that just make this one heck of an update. Enemy hit point changes, let's get on to that first of all. So basically, in the old school of things, the higher the level of the enemy, the higher their health, the higher their armor, and the higher their shields if they have them. That's not changing. What is changing is how it's calculated. Previously it was done on an exponential curve, so every extra level meant an extra amount of armor, health and shields, and anyone who's faced a higher level guerrilla unit knows just how ridiculously high that gets. So that's gone. They've put instead what's known as an S-curve scaling, so it ramps up slowly at first, increases steadily, and then dips back off again, creating, well, basically a lopsided S shape. So those really high level enemies will not be scaling as ridiculously as before in terms of their health. Their damage will still scale up considerably though, so you do have to still actually dodge the incoming fire, but you no longer need to mod out the most riven form of crazy weaponry just to survive the mission. In addition to enemies' health being scaled differently, their aim is no longer tied to levels. The enemies will no longer be supermassive aimbots at the highest of levels. There's still plenty of damage to deal with, but you've got a bit more chance to dodge out the way of it. This means that you Limbo players can actually leave the Rift now, though I know that half of you are still never going to do that. Yes, you know who you are. Now let's talk about shield changes. You ever been one-shot before? Just one-shot out the blue? Hit so hard that you saw God? Well, that is now a thing of the past. Shield gating means that if the hit would crack your shields, your health is unaffected no matter the amount of damage that you just took, and you gain basically a brief period of immunity to gather your senses. So this gives you just enough time to realise what on earth is shooting you and to promptly soil yourself before you die now. Well, more realistically, it actually is pretty good at improving your tank. I've tried it out in a couple missions. You lose your shields in that big hit, but you realise something's going on and actually can catch yourself before that hidden enemy just turns you into mush. Your shields across the board also now have a 25% flat damage resistance, basically just increasing the strength of shields for all frames. And the variable weaknesses of player health and shields has been removed, perhaps temporarily, but for the meantime then it means all incoming damage has the same type to it. So 100 viral damage and 100 puncture is just as lethal or unlethal to you. Enemies will also be gaining shield gating, where they have shields to gate with, that is. But theirs is somewhat different. They take a bleed through onto their health once their shields are depleted on that first shot. So for example, if you hit them for 100 damage and they've only got 50 shields, that follow-up 50 damage will hit their health, but much less so. It's actually 20 times less so. So you need to be doing an absurd amount of damage compared to the enemy's health to be able to one-shot them if you're just going for an ordinary shot. That said, if you aim for a weak spot, you can just ignore shield gating altogether. So that's things like the headshot on a Corpus Tech or the crotch shot on a mower. And let's be honest, it should also be the crotch shot on a Corpus Tech, but I don't make the game. Those kind of weak spots will completely ignore enemy shield gating, so you can still get a 360 no-scope with your favourite sniper rifle. In addition, all Warframe abilities will ignore shield gating entirely. This applies not only to enemies, but if you have a radiation proc, you will ignore the shield gating of friendlies as well. So you Embers and Equinoxes out there, please do be careful, you're going to kill friends still. We're not done yet though. Player shields will also now start regenerating just 1 second after taking damage, so long as you don't drop to 0 shields. If you drop to 0, it'll take 4 seconds for them to start regenerating. So this means dodging that last bit of damage will get your defense back quicker, which is again another nice benefit to shield frames. If you let the shield drop down and rely on the shield gate, you pay for that with those extra seconds before the recharge. So this is another buff to the shields, along with the one-shot immunity and the extra 25% damage resistance, which is basically 100 armor for shields. Actually, yep, shields are getting another buff in that slash status procs will also no longer ignore shields. That pesky damage type that would trigger a red symbol and skip into your fragile, non-regenerating health ball, nope, that's now held back by the almighty shield bar. Toxin's still going straight through though, so you Nox Huffers, you're going to still need extra health. Now, arcanes have been changed. First and foremost, you can no longer put 2 of the same arcane onto a Warframe or using the same Magus arcane together. Instead, they can be ranked up to rank 5, giving you approximately 50% more power out of a single arcane than you previously could on the old patch. This does mean you'll need to put together more arcanes in total to get to that power level, and it won't be as strong in a single area as it was before. But you have the space to add on a second arcane alongside that, giving a bit more variety in the builds. There have been some nerfs to the arcanes out there, such as adding on cooldowns to a couple of the more meta arcanes, but let's be honest, that just gives a bit more freedom to pick something rather than the top only best arcane there is. The anti-status arcanes can now be ranked up to total immunity to their specific status procs. So for example, Tox immunity is 100% with the max rank arcane, meaning your shield frame is even more safe against bleed through damage. Okay, so self damage. It's gone. Alright, it's not just that simple. Self damage is completely gone from explosive weapons, which is great. However, this has been replaced with a staggering mechanic. Basically, the more damage you would have done to yourself, the more knockdown or knockback you get instead from the weapon. It has been added to other explosive weapons as well, like the Staticor, which previously didn't and, well, still don't have self-damage, so you will notice some additional knockback on other weapons like that. The explosive weapons with the staggering no hurtiness will have damage fall off over the range of their explosion. This is up to a 90% damage reduction at max range, but only on specific weapons, so some weapons have a up to 30% reduction, whilst others have up to the 90%. You'll need to check your individual weapon to see what yours is. This staggering mechanic also comes with a new and extremely hard to use ninja reflexes mechanic, basically where you can resist a stagger or knockdown by jumping at just the right time. It's so hard to do, I've not managed to do it once reliably so far, so if you're able to do that, you're better than me. So when it comes to excavators, we're no longer dropping in the Walmart brand excavators every mission, regardless of level. Instead, when there's higher tier enemies, the Lotus will generously be providing us with more resilient excavators that don't just pop the moment a level 60 heavy gunner looks at it. I'll be honest, as much as I liked having the wherewithal to actually bring a defensive frame to protect the objective, it's nice not to be forced to bring it or suffer endless impossible missions. The average public excavation mission will be less aneurysm inducing. I do say only less. I still have no hope for those Rhino Primes out there who manage to die more often than ranked vaults. I mean, they're still going to fail the objective for you. Next up, armor buffs. You didn't just think it would be shield buffs in these patch notes, did you? I mean, reading through I did, so this was actually a nice surprise, but there we go. A large number of frames just got their armor increased significantly. As in, the lowest armor now is 100, whereas previously it was things like Banshee's eye-wateringly low 15 armor. No wonder she was screaming into the ground all the time. Lots of frames have been ticked up just a little bit, so it's not going to be life-changing, but it means a health and armor build is less ridiculous on most frames. And every frame that has been upgraded this way benefits a little bit more from the health buff, such as from Wisp. On someone like Harrow, which has gone from 150 to 175, it's only around a 3% point extra damage reduction, or 10.5% more reduction compared to before, but it's still something. Mostly though, this means that all health and shield will have at minimum 25% damage reduction, because that's what 100 armor does, and that's what's been done to the new shields. So between that and the shield gating, every frame's just that little bit tankier now. The more naff rewards in the star chart missions are being scrapped. Basically, DE have finally accepted nobody enjoys getting an end of round reward of 15 endo. So as of now, the Crummier credit and endo rewards have all been raised to their highest amount for the specific mission. So, for example, as they say in the patch notes, a mission which previously gave 500, 1000, 1500 and 2000 credits will now just give 2000 credits when that's the reward chosen. I've had a brief look at the drop tables and it's basically an overwrite job, so the extra goodies will remain the same drop chance. Any of the endo or credit rewards have been buffed up to the highest they should have been for that rotation. There are a couple bugs out there still putting out less than the correct amount of endo or other rewards, but they're probably going to fill in those gaps in the next coming week. So overall, this is an improvement to the Star Chat missions, especially for newer players, as they're the ones most struggling to get the credits and endo they need just to really get into the game. Alright Nan, let's get diving into the status changes, as there have been a bunch of them. First things first, do you remember the first time your critical chance went over 100% and you saw that large, gorgeous orange crit? Well, status chance does this now too. With a status of over 100%, the remaining percent will roll a second status chance from the same shot. So for status overkill builds, this is going to get exciting. If you have a 200% status chance, you'll be dealing 2 status procs every single shot, rather than previously being limited to a max of 1. Status will also be displayed differently on the UI to properly show what your actual status chance is, and shotgun statuses have been redone to give more ordinary status application, rather than previously where as soon as you hit 100% the whole thing just went crazy. Now the status changes aren't just about double procs. Those procs are also going to lead to even harsher effects on the enemies. And this is just on enemies, so that means Warframes will still only be affected by a single instance of a status proc, but you can hit enemies with even harsher ones by doing it repeatedly. As part of this then, a number of different statuses are changing how they work, so I'll just quickly go through those with you. Slash status procs will do the same as they did before pretty much, except they'll be hitting shields first and then going into their health, ignoring armor. There'll also be less damage numbers coming up on screen just to try and reduce overall PC load. Impact procs, when you stack up those, will build up from little staggers to full-on ragdolling enemies. Puncture status procs, stacked up, will accrue additional enemy damage reduction, up to 75% reduced damage from enemies. Cold status, when you stack that up, will slow enemies an additional amount, up to 70% total slow. And heat status is not changing in the slightest. That one's still stripping the armor by half and dealing damage over time. Toxin damage, similarly to Slash, is going to show less numbers on screen, but Toxin still goes straight through to shields onto the health. Toxin will be reduced by armor, whereas Slash damage isn't, so you've got a bit of a give and take between the two damage types there. And lastly, electricity, in the basic elementals this is going to gain the ability to deal damage again to an already stunned target, which in a bit of testing isn't actually anything significant to worry about. Moving on to the combination damage types, Blast has been changed, so it will reduce the accuracy of nearby enemies, and additional stacks will reduce the accuracy up to 75%. blast procs are cast in an AoE, so multiple enemies will be hit by that at once. Corrosive has been significantly changed. It'll no longer strip enemy armor permanently, and it'll no longer strip it down to 100%, instead stopping at 80% reduction in their armor. This does mean that corrosive damage won't remove the actual damage buffs to hitting the right kind of damage against enemies, but it also means they'll still be left with that 20% of armor, which may prove to be a bit of a complication at high level missions, although taking into account the new armor scaling, it shouldn't be that bad in the end. Radiation procs have now been changed as well. They'll continue to cause enemies to attack each other, but additional radiation procs will increase the friendly fire damage they deal. Given that enemies don't actually deal a lot of damage in the first place compared to their health pools, this might not be the biggest change in the world, but given that enemies are actually going to have reduced health scaling, this could still overall improve how radiation works. Still, the main bit about radiation is keeping enemies off of you, and that will continue to happen. Magnetic, viral, and gas effects have also changed somewhat significantly. Magnetic no longer reduces the shields of enemies directly. Instead, it causes shields to take double damage, and with additional stacks, shields will take even more damage without the ability to regenerate. Viral damage, similarly to magnetic, will now no longer reduce health. Instead, it causes health to take double damage, with additional procs raising that to take even more damage. After testing, this does stack with other status effects. So for example, if you proc viral and slash, the slash damage will be doing even more damage than before. And lastly, gas procs will no longer cause a toxin aura to be immediately released. Instead, gas creates a kind of a mist around enemies, constantly hitting others nearby for gas damage. DE are currently looking at this because it seems actually like an overall nerf to this status proc, so this one may be changing shortly. Keep an eye on that one. As an extra bonus to all elemental status procs, they previously had a 4 times lower chance of triggering compared to physical damage. So previously if you had 100 puncture and 400 electric damage, the status would have a 50-50 chance of being each of them. Now it's based purely on the actual damage totals with no extra weighting. So if you've got twice as much elemental damage as physical damage, you'll have twice as many elemental procs. This is a huge buff to elemental procs, but it does mean it is also a nerf to slash procs. Also, given that we've got the ability to go over 100% status now, the pure status chance mods for all weapons have been fully buffed. Most of them previously were a 15% status chance increase, or 30% for shotguns. Now it is 90% across the board. There have also been plenty of other smaller changes throughout the entirety of Warframe. There is a veritable essay load of other fixes, optimizations and smaller changes, plus all the railjack changes, which I've not even begun to touch on. Things like the new companion invincibility option in the Simulacrum. Again, I'm not going to touch on all the rest because there is just a load of them. Honestly, at this point, just go download the update, dive in to a major patching patch that the veterans have been clamouring for. It's not every day a dev team puts out such an abundance of quality life improvements, and I, for one, am absolutely ecstatic.
Help me! Okay. Oh no.